You're alone in your room late at night, turning the dial on an old shortwave radio, when suddenly, amid the static, a voice breaks through. Robotic monotone, 7 dot 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 0 dot 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 7. It continues for minutes, maybe hours. You don't know who's speaking. You don't know who they're speaking to. And you're not supposed to. These are number stations, real, mysterious broadcasts that have echoed across the world since the Cold War, transmitting coded messages and eerie voices to agents who may no longer exist. Governments have never claimed them. The codes have never been broken. And yet, the broadcasts continue ... even today. Who's still listening? And what happens if someone answers? Number stations, or numeric stations, are shortwave radio. Stations that broadcast nothing but a series of numbers and letters spoken in a deadpan monotone. The broadcasts, which can be picked up around the world, typically consist of a single voice reading out the code seemingly at random and then repeating it again and again and again. While there are some more obscure examples from the 20th century, the classic example of a number station is probably this broadcast. By the BBC in 1971, it might sound like something out of an episode of The Twilight Zone, but in fact these enigmatic transmissions actually played a vital role during the Cold War, the era of numbers. Stations began in the early days of the Cold War with the U.S. sending out the first number station in 1952. Known as Radio Free Europe, the station was part of a strategy to circumvent the Iron Curtain. As the name suggests, the station was based in Europe and aimed at signals towards Eastern Bloc countries behind the Iron Curtain. The idea was that those countries were effectively locked off from Western media, which could spread anti-Soviet propaganda. So instead, the U.S. would use clandestine stations like Radio Free Europe to relay their message directly into Eastern Bloc countries. And the way they encoded the message was simple: numbers. That was because these broadcasts weren't necessarily intended for the average citizen of Eastern Bloc countries. They were intended for spies or sleeper agents already living inside those countries who had been trained to recognize the code and take appropriate action. For instance, if the agent heard the number sequence 413, the instructions might be to leave the city via the northeast exit. Or if the broadcast started with the letter C, that might indicate that the mission was canceled. But the general public would hear the broadcast and just think, weird. Then they'd go back to tending bar or whatever it was people did back then. But as you can imagine, that system wasn't perfect. Sometimes Soviet authorities would get wind of the broadcast and of what was being said. And in order to avoid any suspicion, both sides needed to change the codes frequently. So that's why the broadcasts consist of long sequences of random numbers and letters read over and over again. Each sequence was unique and only valid for a few hours. If the Soviets intercepted a broadcast, they wouldn't know what it meant, and they certainly wouldn't be able to decrypt any future broadcasts. All they'd know is that the Western spies were onto something. Now, the U.S. was just one of several countries that operated number stations during the Cold War. Other countries like Australia, Canada, and Germany also ran similar programs to target other parts of the world. But the most famous number station ever was operated by the Soviet Union itself, known as Mayak, or the Lighthouse. In the West, the Russian Mayak was the equivalent of Radio Free Europe, targeting the nations behind the Iron Curtain. But Mayak was run by the KGB, and it broadcast to Eastern Bloc nations as well as to the rest of the world. A few people in the West managed to pick up the signal and decode the messages, showing that Maya targeted spies working abroad, including within the walls of the U.S. State Department. In fact, the reason we know so much about Maya today is due to one man, Gordon Skilling, a Swedish radio enthusiast who, after picking up the signal, built a massive Yagi antenna array consisting of 100 antennas spread across Sweden. The array enabled him to accurately triangulate where the broadcast was coming from, eventually leading him to discover that the signals were coming from Russia. With that information, Schilling worked with intelligence officials from Finland to spy on the Russians' communications and eventually make his way into the KGB archives, where he found documents relating to the true purpose of the broadcast. We now know that the messages contained in the broadcasts were orders given to Soviet spies working abroad. One fascinating aspect of Mayan broadcasts is that they continued even after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. For years, the broadcasts continued with the Russian government claiming they were simply continuing the legacy of the stations that had been established to protect Russian interests abroad. However, it seems that the broadcast didn't stop until 2003, but when the shutdown happened, it wasn't announced and no one really knows why they were shut down. Maybe all the spies had retired, maybe the game of espionage had moved online, or maybe they just didn't need them anymore. While the Cold War may be over, number stations aren't relics of the past. There are new stations popping up all the time. The internet has made it easy for anyone to start their own number station, and many people do it for fun. Some people take it more seriously, though, like the mysterious voice of the mountains. The station started broadcasting in 2014 and is notable for its bizarre call signs that seem to appear in UFO conspiracy theories. In addition to calling themselves the voice of the mountains, they've also used the call sign Citizens Band 234, though it isn't clear who they're trying to reach. Unfortunately, unless you happen to speak fluent spy, you probably won't understand what they're saying, but that doesn't mean the signal isn't getting through. Here's why. The whole point of these broadcasts is to deliver a message to someone specifically. It isn't like a TV broadcast or a podcast that you tune into. Instead, it's the recipient that tunes into the broadcast. That means that if you happen to find yourself hearing a number station while playing with your radio, you're probably being targeted. That's because, unlike regular radio stations, number stations usually don't give away their location. They operate from unknown places with low power, making them impossible to track unless you have specialized equipment. And then once you find the signal, you have to listen for hours on end to try and catch the message. That's exactly how spies work. And if you accidentally tune in to the wrong frequency, the wrong number sequence, or the wrong letter, you could be sitting there listening to nothing but numbers forever. But what if you actually manage to pick up a message? What should you do? Obviously, the best course of action would be to contact the authorities, especially if the message happens to include your name. But that raises another question. How do you contact the authorities without giving away the fact that you thus somehow received a secret, encrypted message that could compromise national security? The answer, of course, is that you don't. Instead, you become the spy. You follow the instructions in the message, knowing full well that if you're followed or caught, the jig is up. You should probably destroy the radio too. You don't want to make things too easy for them, but why risk it? Why not see what happens if you ignore the message? Well, let's look at some of the messages being broadcast right now to find out. What's that sound? Oh, no, I'm not gonna. That's definitely one of the sequences. Is it calling me? 32653198132653198. There's no way they're actually calling me. I'm not a spy. I'm not even close to being a spy. I bet it's just some silly prank. But what if it's not? What if I'm actually a highly trained KGB operative and I've been compromised? Wait, no, that's ridiculous. I don't even know the first thing about espionage. If I was a spy, I'd be good at lying, but I'm bad at lying to myself. I'm not a spy. Now, what should I do? Do I tell the authorities? No, I don't have proof. I'm not sure it'll come again. Should I tune in every night and wait? Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I should do that. Then I'll be ready. Yeah, that's the ticket. And then if it calls me again, I'll play along. Maybe I'm a spy. I don't remember being briefed on this procedure, though. It's kind of sketchy. I guess I could always just ignore it and hope that it goes away. Yeah, that's probably my best option. If I was a spy, I'd know what to do. So, what do you think? Would you play along with the numbers station? Let us know in the comment section below. Also, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe so you're notified every time we upload a new video. And be sure to check out one of our other videos right here.